Exclusionary zoning practices that functionally kept blacks out of white communities, which, by the way, is still on the books in our own city. Racial covenants, which specifically barred blacks from living in white communities. Predatory lending that continues even today, ensuring that no wealth can be created for blacks with loans structured to make certain equity accumulation was not possible. Banks, insurance companies, neighborhood associations, courts, HUD, and Veteran Affairs, and countless other organizations all focused on keeping blacks in segregated communities where services were non-existent. Educational institutions failed, and policing served as a kind of grooming organization for black boys to move them systematically from schools to prison to help fuel the legal carceral slave trade. This is how we got here. What will it take to get us out of this? Today, I'm here with my guest, Cupid Alexander. Cupid is the Deputy Director of Housing for the City of San Jose. Cupid, I think you started March?
March of last year. Yeah. So it's almost been a year.
Okay. And you have, what, 20 years of experience?
Yeah, somewhere around that, Chuck. Something like that.
I'm not trying to say what your age is. I'm just trying to say you're a very experienced man.
Yes.
So tell me about that. What's your experience? Where are you coming from?
So originally I'm from Portland, Oregon. Okay. I had the chance to work not only as a case manager in Portland, Oregon, but I worked for a redevelopment agency and eventually the mayor of Portland. The previous mayor, his name was Ted Wheeler. He had 2 terms. I worked in his first term. After that, I moved on to work as the Director of Neighborhoods, Housing, and Human Services for a city called Spokane, Washington. Okay. I was recruited from there to go to Austin, Texas to focus on anti-displacement efforts as their Assistant Director of Housing and Planning, and then eventually heading to Houston, Texas, where I spent almost 2 years as the Senior Vice President of Operations for the Houston Housing Authority before heading here. My parents are here, and I think, Chuck, part of our conversation will be about this. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Wow, that is so true. Yeah, it is. It's an interesting dichotomy here. I mean, it's stark, but the reality is there's a lot of folks here from different walks of life, and as we look at what's driving what we will call our housing crisis here, I think most people agree we're in a crisis.
Yes.
What's driving that? I mean, we hear about the poverty rate for African Americans. The poverty rate is pretty significant here, 13.6, which is basically double that of our white counterparts, which is 7.5%. Yeah, true, but what are the other things? What else is driving this housing crisis? It's not just po folk, right?
Right, and I think there are several questions that we can unpack with this one initial question, which is, number one, California, and we're going to speak to California in the Bay Area, is already underdeveloped. So that means that we already don't have the amount of housing that is needed for people to pay about 30% of their income. So that also is driving demand up. If you look at land use, if you look at historical use of space, if you look at California's attempt to redevelop, you've seen that it has been a moving target, and we have never really housed at the way that we need to. Okay. And so you're seeing the historical inequities just forwarded over time. Right. So I think that people might feel like it's new, but this is not a new issue. And just like you and I had talked about off camera, we are focusing on the African American community in this conversation. Right. And we know that there are so many other individuals and subsets of the population that have some of the similar issues in that stat that you brought up, that 7.5% of the population being at poverty, but the African American community being more than double that or almost double that is something for consideration, because what that means is that rent is higher, expenses are higher, and these issues are fractal, so your issues have issues. Right. Case in point being like, you can't go to the dentist, now you got to get a root canal.
Right.
Type of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done that. Expensive. No, I get it actually, and it's kind of like you said. It's our problems have problems here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as we look at the Black community here, our problems is, in my own research and experience here, is just so multidimensional.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to look at one element in a vacuum. You know, looking at poverty rates don't tell the full story. Looking at employment rates don't really tell it tells you something, but not the story. It kind of buries the lead. So that the outcomes that we experience here are impacted in so many ways.
Right.
From education, housing, obviously, unhoused population being so significantly high. But these things are all kind of impacted by employment. That, to me, that's the leading source. As a matter of fact, in surveys of unhoused populations, the number one thing that they say drove them into homelessness was either loss of a job or inadequate income. So those are the things that are impacting not just Black folks, all folks.
Yeah, and you know, I want to point that out because prior, and a lot of the work that we do, we try to say, you know, a lot of the unhoused population and those who are housing insecure are working.
Yeah.
The working poor. So it's not about hard work. You're seeing so many families and so many people in the Bay Area, specific to Silicon Valley, specific to San Jose, who are in our unhoused population, and yet they go to work every single day. Somewhere between 25 to 40% over this last year are individuals who are working either full or part-time or several jobs more than full-time. And what you're seeing is that their income is not leveraged in a way that they can maintain the rent amounts here because of the demand.
Actually, that's a good point. Let's look at that. Let's unpack that a little bit, because what we call the AMI, the number everybody talks about, here is significantly higher than in other communities.
Oh, absolutely.
Even 80% is considered affordable housing here.
Right.
And we're talking $100,000 a year, essentially for one person.
Yep.
That's the 80%.
Yep.
If you fall below that, 60%, which is, obviously lower, but still in most places, that is a reasonable living.
Right. Or it should be.
It should be, right.
or it should be.
Right.
But when we start talking about six figures and you still qualify for public housing and housing assistance and still not being enough, then we're starting to wonder what our math is looking like.
Yeah. It's definitely new math, for sure. And it impacts a significant portion of what we call the missing middle.
Yes.
These are often teachers. These are folks who work in our communities, who earn a reasonable living, but not enough.
Yeah.
And as price pressure increases, less and less is available for rent, to the point where one day they find themselves without a place to call home.
Absolutely.
So what do we do to create more of those places for the missing middle to call home?
So when we're talking about missing middle, we're talking about a middle type of housing. So think of triplexes, quads, walk-up gardens. And in California, many cities, I'm not just going to point to San Jose or San Francisco or Oakland, many cities are single-family housing dwellings, and that you cannot build those types of housing units that would be more affordable because you would still be able to finance them, make a decent amount of money, and it would still be offered within the same space that a single-family house would take, right? And then the other missing middle is for middle income earners. So those who are maybe 80% to 120% area median income, so between total family income of $88,000 to $130,000 or $140,000. That's medium. So those two things kind of work together, but that would be a great start. I know that, there has been a lot of, and I think we're focusing on this in San Jose, right? One is going to be gentle density, which is ADU developments, accessory dwelling units. I'm not going to use acronyms. We use too many. I'm like, right, Chuck? You're like, yep. ADUs. So if you think of the backyard cottages, that is what's called gentle density, and that's one of the ways. But I know a lot of people want to be more aggressive and reframing what the building codes and the planning and land use rulings say, to increase the amount of density that's allowed, but also to preserve the neighborhood. And this is where it becomes a community conversation, right? Because people are like, Chuck, you're changing the feel of the community. In gentle density and with some of the missing middle, you can have the facade where it looks like a single family, but it's a quad, it's a duplex. But those are hard conversations. But I think that that's one of the ways, right?
Yeah, that's actually a very good way.
Yes.
As we actually allow those to be condos now.
Yes.
Which is an exceptional way to create a housing stock that's affordable and ownable.
Yes.
Which will help to drive that, as that panacea of wealth for families.
Yeah, and I think we're getting down to that. If it's how do we create opportunities for low-income communities where African Americans are overrepresented, we have to change the building types. We have to have, the adaptive reuse conversation. So you've seen a lot of condo conversions. Sometimes those get very expensive, but there are ways that we can look at it. And then there's all sorts of financing types. One thing that I like to put on the table for everyone is community land trust and like the Habitat for Humanity model, right? Yes. Because that is one way. And if you remember, the African American community started that back in the day, right? So this community land trust was a way that you could have a separate cost for the land and a separate cost for the building. Because, in development, they say location, 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 right? So if all of the costs for construction kind of even out no matter where you are, depending on what you're building, then perhaps it's the land that costs a lot. You take that off the table, and then it makes it affordable development, which is why I love, as an entryway into ownership, the community land trust model and the Habitat for Humanity model. And people are familiar with those things. So there are ways with changing the type of buildings that we build, changing the types of facades that we have, so it does match the neighborhood, but does offer that first entryway into wealth building. And I say wealth building because people need that first step, and that first step can lead to a second step. But these are the types of interventions that onboard people to feeling like the community is looking out for them.
Actually, let's talk a little bit about the land trust concept.
Okay.
So you have a piece of land, the housing goes on that land. Who owns the land?
So usually the entity owns the land, right? So the entity, and it could be a community-based entity. There's several in the Bay Area, but let's say Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity will own the land, you own the building. So let's say you buy the building for $100,000, and they have a model that says it stays perpetually affordable. That means that if you spend $100,000, pay it all off, your family can live there forever. But when you go to sell it, you'll get the $100,000 plus a percentage of the increase. Let's say it's worth $200,000. You will get a percentage of that, so you'll get maybe $120,000, and then it makes it affordable for the next family.
So you get some equity.
You get some equity.
You can afford your down payment on the next place, so you can move into something else that you fully own. But you also transfer that land back to the community.
You got
to
it.
the next family.
You got it.
So that they can build the same equity they need to move themselves forward.
And this is how you seed fund opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
They said they forgot we were seeds. They put us in the ground, they forgot we were seeds. We will continue to grow. And that's one of the ways, additionally, that if we want to hit some of the hardest hit communities, including the African American community, we need to start from somewhere. But the beautiful thing is that America has done this before, and we could do it again.
Yeah, we could. And I've seen it work.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, it works very well. But let's talk about the current urgent situation. Because we're really trying to help people move from our unhoused state, the unhoused state, to housing. There's a real important urgency to doing that. Because we understand that the longer people are unhoused, the comorbidity and other issues rise significantly, and the cost of those issues rise significantly. So, for example, our transition age youth housing problem here is the worst in the country. Unfortunately, our young folks are unhoused in San Jose at the highest level, even of New York, in our city, in our county. That situation has to be addressed in some way, because 2 years on the street, and people always say, well, our unhoused population, they have drug problems, alcohol problems, and I always say this: if I were unhoused for 2 weeks, you can bet I have a drug problem.
Right.
I'll have a drug problem in 2 weeks.
Right.
I would not have it when I hit that street.
Right.
It's a harsh, difficult life, specifically for young people.
Right, and this is another one of those big questions that Chuck likes to ask that we need to break down. So there's several things that I'm hearing. The first thing that I'm hearing is that there are transition age youth. Those are TAYs. We call them TAYs as an acronym. But
I try not to use that.
Yes. 16 to 24. Some individuals are exiting out of foster care. Some have a relationship issue with parents or a guardian. They no longer are there. Some think that they can have a level of independence, and then they go out on their own. They find that it's hard, or if they no longer connected with their community. We're talking about the inputs into homelessness, so exiting out of the carceral system. Something that people forget is the silver tsunami, so individuals who are going to be retiring, and they're retiring into poverty, especially as there's more discussions about the social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, that help provide that in the first place. And then you see individuals who have health concerns. Those are ways, and then your general economic status. Those 5 ways are how you enter into that. You also mentioned something, I'm going to unpack this a little bit, the acuity levels go up. So your health, you are absolutely right. The longer that you're unhoused, the more that you self-medicate. And some of the things is that people like to say, oh, it's because of drugs. And I was like, well, there's a lot of people who are housed using drugs. If this was about drugs, we would start a lot of other places. But this is about the situation people are in, and they're using some sort of medication that might be unregulated, and they don't have any barriers, cushions, safety net to prevent all that. So saying all that to say, where do we start? We start at prevention. So where can we invest in our social safety net so people don't become dependent on self-medicating, or they fall into homelessness and they're rapidly rehoused? That's where we're focused. There's a lot of regional partners that do this work, and it's investing in that system and investing in them. I think some of the concerns that people have, no matter where your politics are how the social safety net are going to exist with the current way that we're talking about it in our financing space of social deliverables, I'll say, right? And so I think that that's a community question, but we know that it's cheaper for it to never happen than for us to deal with it after years of it happening. And then there's a history to that. So there are places where people used to camp, other sides of the freeway. Chuck, you and I were talking about that. And so there is a history that we still have to address. But in the meantime, how do we prevent individuals from becoming so successively unhoused that they build the acuity that is hard to come back from? And it's to provide these interventions, provide these touch points as early as we can to rapidly rehouse them. Some real programs that we have within the city of San Jose and Santa Clara and throughout the country are rapid rehousing programs and tenant-based rental assistance programs.
Actually, let's talk about that. The rental assistance is significantly cheaper. I mean, I was talking to a young woman who runs an organization that provides rental assistance to people who are almost or about to become unhoused. And she can actually do it. She can actually keep them in their housing for $2,000.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine? That is so much less than what it takes to, a unit of housing here is, for a unit of permanent housing is about a little under $1 million. Okay? That's a lot of money.
But to develop.
Yes. And we know that we're never going to meet our RENA goals. The requirement for housing is significantly great. So if we can keep people in the homes they're in for $2,000.
Oh, that's a leveraged deal. Yeah. And Chuck, you mentioned something, and we said we weren't going to use acronyms.
Oh, sorry, I said RHNA goals, didn't I?
So regional housing needs allocation. It's the requirement that the state has to meet all of your affordable housing needs, affordable housing being 30% of your income going at every income level. So Chuck was referring to that. So we do know some of the current numbers that are needed for units that need to be created.
Yeah, and it's significantly high. And I get it. You know, I get the understanding of trying to plan for and create room for and possibility for housing. And I think that's healthy for all cities, because for so long, some of our neighbors were making it more and more difficult for people to stay in their communities. And they then come to ours. And we have to solve that problem.
You do see some regional migration. I think that's what you're speaking to. But I also think I'm glad we're demystifying some of these things, right? So we all have a responsibility to our community. As we're talking about tenant-based rental assistance and kind of like this voucher-sized program, remember that individuals are also invested in their own upward mobility. So a portion of their income goes towards rent, which keeps them within our economic system.
Key. Absolutely key to their ongoing success.
Right.
Absolutely. Now, I talked to a young woman earlier today who she had 2 hours of overtime, and that made her no longer qualify. Is that fair?
It's absolutely not fair. What are we talking about? You know, I think the thing is right. Chuck's like, I'm not trying to catch you off guard. Is that fair? It is not fair. So, Chuck, I think it incentivizes some of the worst behaviors that we see where people opt out because they're trying to manage versus us giving them on boards to ways that we can have exemptions, allowances, if you're doing the things that we want you to do. So for many years, and most recently working at a housing authority, you have earned income disallowances, right? It's just like mortgage interest deduction. So my call has been, how do we expand that for the actions and the efforts that we want to see so people are involved in their own upward mobility, and per dollar, we're still saving money. Right?
Exactly.
And so that's the like Section 8 and programmatic reforms that you and I need to look into, but we just haven't had enough time, because I think the biggest generational challenge we have right now is our unsheltered population, and it's been like a tsunami on the African American community and all indigent communities.
It is a tsunami, actually, and it became overwhelming almost instantly. We didn't notice it happening. It was happening all the time, though. It has always been there, but specifically in the Black community, it's been there for a long time.
It's been there for a very long time.
And it goes to those red lines in communities. That freeway that you mentioned earlier is what happened to those communities, where they became subdivided. The red line was there, then they built a freeway. So that red line could never be erased. And to my mind, I don't know if I missed the memo, but I don't think those red lines were ever erased.
And for those who are wondering what Chuck is talking about, you can Google like redlining. You could see it all over, and it eliminated opportunities arbitrarily, right? So where people would otherwise qualify for loans and bank accounts and investment capital, all within the system that they contribute to.
Some of them veterans.
Some of them veterans, as we all know. Well, if you don't know, look up World War II and then Black veterans. You saw individuals who earned something that they inserted and they deposited into the piggy bank, but they could not withdraw. And I think that is part of the root and part of the history from the prevailing thoughts of the time that we still grapple with. You and I talk offline a lot about history and neighborhood preservation. And those are tools that are used to this day to preserve advantages at a time where the playing field was not even. But I'm always saying, don't believe us. Go look at it. But it creates this false dichotomy where people are saying, if they only would have planned better.
What's interesting, Cupid, is the other side of that. The concept of gentrification, and people don't understand how the framing of that is different than your perception sometimes. Because gentrification is looked at, I think, for a lot of people in terms of, improvements in the community, better housing, it looks better. But the actual subtext of the gentrification is that for those communities that were left behind for so long, those communities that were redlined, where their property values did not increase with the market, where home ownership was not allowed was only allowed to them in that specific community, but not in the one next door.
Yes.
Those become targets
Right.
for gentrification.
Right.
And what technically happens is all of the pent up value of that real estate actually goes to the next owner.
Yep. Yep.
It doesn't go to those folks who have held those properties for so long. And the impact means that they might get a payout that looks significant, but its actual value in terms of generational wealth is fractional.
Yep. Yep.
So as we look to develop, and I think a lot of times we hear people say, well, not in my backyard.
Yeah, NIMBY. Yep.
NIMBYs.
Yep.
But those aren't the kind of neighborhoods that we're thinking about.
Yeah.
When we're talking about gentrification. We're not
Right.
really talking about the NIMBY communities.
No.
We're talking about communities with the Cayuelos, communities where there's pent up value waiting to be unbound.
Right. Right.
I personally think there's an opportunity and a responsibility of government to help those communities get out of that box.
Yes, and I think what you're speaking to is rethinking what community development is,
Yes.
right? Because as we're talking about the African American community and we're talking about the lack of value and the lack of transferable wealth, you have to look at how the infrastructure was laid over to eliminate that, because even if I got a payout, unless I was able to secure a loan in another neighborhood, because now my neighborhood has less housing. If there was demand before, there's even more now, right? And if I cannot secure a loan to simply go to another neighborhood, there's nothing for me to pass on. And the instruments that we have to produce wealth, you are arbitrarily kept from. So you're restarting and restarting and restarting and restarting.
Yeah.
It's no woe is me conversation. It's the actuality of the system. And as we're looking at this system, we're like, well, there's something that we're looking to where we're trying to determine how it can be more fair and just.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's it. And so it's not really a hand me down, a give me, even in the World War II, where Black veterans could not qualify for the loans, you have to remember that African Americans are overrepresented in their service of armed forces, right? I think that there's this question that people ask where they're like, well, this seems so arbitrary. Maybe we should dive into that, because I've been working super hard. It just seems like the color of money for me isn't able to be leveraged. And I'm not saying take this away from anyone else.
Right.
I'm like, how do I get that also?
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And how do I get what's due?
Yes.
What's fair?
What's fair?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And I think one of the things, Chuck, is that, this is where I'm always saying that it's a plus, it's an also, where I'm saying you don't lose, the community gains. You have a growing tax base. Safety and security is encouraged through community development. And I'm excited when I have these conversations, because it just reminds me that America has always been focused on improving the quality of life for everyone, and we can still do that.
Yeah, we
can still do that.
If we put our hearts where our mouths are, we can do that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you guys for joining us. That's been another episode of Dying to Stay Here, where we're really focused on making this work for us all. All right. Thank you.